Thank you, Madam Chair. Andre Marin, the Ombudsman of Ontario, and I'm joined as well by Bonnie Lysyk, the Auditor General of Ontario. So I will go first, and Ms. Lysyk will also have a few words for the committee. As a legislative officer entrusted with responsibility that government administrators act fairly, responsibly and lawfully in their dealings with the public, I feel compelled to address Bill 91's proposal to eliminate the oversight of Hydro One by various accountability officers, including my office. In particular, I would like to see Schedule 30, which would amend the Ombudsman Act, withdrawn in its entirety. As I understand it, the argument in favor of abandoning independent external scrutiny of Hydro One by the legislative officers is that it is necessary in order to attract investors and that the corporation is partially privatized. It's also suggested that an in-house ombudsperson would ensure the customer concerns are addressed in the future. Perhaps this argument might have been more persuasive if I had not just completed an extended investigation of Hydro One after receiving an unprecedented 10,565 complaints. I'll be issuing my final report on May 25th, Monday morning, but I've already reported publicly on some of the horror stories that we have uncovered. For instance, a Sudbury man was charged $23,775 for using more than 100,000 kilowatt hours at his cottage in 19 months, the amount of electricity that 5 full-time homes would normally require in 2 years. My office determined that Hydro One's new computer system had triggered a meter rollover, resulting in a large overcharge. It later corrected the bill and gave him a service credit of $402. Then there was the London area father of 2 children who was frantic about being threatened with having his electricity cut off in the coldest February on record for Ontario. Our staff confirmed with Hydro One that it never intended to disconnect his service. It was rather a tactic to get him to fork over some cash, which he did after borrowing money to pay part of the balance and entering into a repayment plan. And then there was the widow from Renfrew County who had set up pre-authorized payments, but suddenly found that $5,500 had been withdrawn from her account, triggering $89 in overdraft fees. Hydro One admitted it was a mistake, but said processing a refund would take 2 weeks. Hydro One told us that the woman's smart meter was not communicating properly and had been underestimating the power use of her property for 2 years. The overdraft and fees were eventually reversed. She also received a credit for $661 on her account and entered into a 48-month repayment plan. It took months for Hydro One to admit that implementation of a new computerized billing system in 2003 triggered a host of billing problems. On March 11, 2015, it acknowledged that at least 78,000 people have been affected by billing issues. Throughout the province, tens of thousands of individuals were distraught by billing issues and received a flurry of estimated bills, huge catch-up bills, bills with highly inflated amounts, and in some cases, no bills at all for extended periods of time. When they tried to get things straightened out, they were faced very often with rude, insensitive, and singularly unhelpful responses from Hydro One in its outsourced call center. To compound the situation, Hydro One continued to treat its customers with disrespect, disingenuously threatening to disconnect electricity in winter months despite its policy never to do so. Since my investigation was launched and the billing customer service mess at Hydro One was exposed, the company has been frantically trying to rehabilitate its reputation. Now, I have no doubt, having closely examined Hydro One's inner workings, that a company ombudsperson influenced by the prevailing internal culture would simply have swept this whole episode under the corporate rug. Without the prospect of external scrutiny, Hydro One's customers will be again at risk. When a corporation provides a monopolistic service Without appropriate accountability, safeguards, its customers are vulnerable to the profit motive and are easily dismissed and disregarded. Electricity is a vital service in Ontario. In some jurisdictions, it has been recognized that utility customers need protection beyond what regulatory agencies, the courts, or internal customer advocates can offer. I have one final sentence. In jurisdictions around the world, ombudsmen are not only responsible for supervising public bodies, but ensuring that private electricity, telephony, water, and gas mail providers treat their customers fairly.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Mr. McNaughton.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that presentation and being here at committee. You said you had 10,565 complaints. I feel that probably 5,000 of those came from my riding. It's predominantly served the customers there, the constituents by Hydro One. What does this mean to the people of Ontario that there's going to be no oversight of a public utility that they're still going to own 40% of?
Well, it's troublesome. As I indicated in my opening, all these things happen, and when we announced the investigation to Hydro One, we were all told by Hydro One officials that, oh, it's water under the bridge, things are still fixed. And as I talked today, complaints are still trickling in, 6, 7, 8. So it concerns me that under this new era that there will be no place to turn to. A good example of something similar having happened over the years is the example of Tarion, which used to be the Ontario New Home Warranty. It was devolved from the government. We lost jurisdiction. An internal ombudsman was created, and I almost get calls or emails on a daily basis asking us to speak out on the need for Tarion to be accountable to the outside. So I fear that this is another Tarion in the making.
To me, this, regardless of political stripe, reeks of political cover-up. Today, the government announced, I am assuming to preempt your presentation here at committee, they announced that you're going to have oversight, I believe over school boards was the announcement, but yet they're taking the oversight away from something that obviously there needs to be a public oversight. Is it fair to say that they're taking this away from the office to prevent political risk?
I can't comment on the political risk, but certainly they are taking Hydro One away from our oversight, which is unfortunate. I would think that if Commissioner Ed Clark had had the benefit of reading the report before writing his, I'm not so sure that he would have persisted in suggesting that we would not have oversight. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a trend around the world to put their classical ombudsman in various jurisdictions to oversee the private sector utility business. But here in Ontario, we have a mental blockage. It's going to the private sector. The ombudsman of Ontario has no business. It's like a fait accompli, whereas we are really in Ontario swimming against the fish.
So it's fair to say that your one simple ask today would be, since this is still owned or going to be owned by 40% of the public still going to own this, that oversight should remain.
Absolutely, and I think if you have an opportunity to see our report on Monday, you will see these are the kinds of horror stories that there's no way an internal ombudsman buried in the innards of a corporation would have been able to address these issues. Again, when is the last time we've heard a negative public report criticizing Tarion by the Tarion Ombudsman? I don't remember seeing one at all. And so I wouldn't expect an internal ombudsman at Hydro One to be able to handle these kinds of issues.
Great. Thank you very much.
I'm going to Ms. French.
Thank you, and thank you both very much for being here. Looking forward to the report on Monday. But as you have said, that you've received over 10,500 complaints, many of them, I guess, from MPP McNaughton's riding, but the largest number that you have ever received about a single organization. In your opinion, do you think that the number of complaints from the public is likely to increase or decrease with the privatization of Hydro One?
It's hard to predict, but certainly Hydro One needs to go through a cultural shock before it can recover, Madam Chair. We saw this in the OLG, MPAC. Our investigations led to that kind of cultural shock. Now, will privatization lead to that cultural shock, or whether, again, fear from investors will mean that the corporation continues to plod? I'd like to believe that, overnight, a zap, all the problems will disappear as soon as it's privatized. But if you look at history, that's very unlikely to happen.
Thank you. 8 independent officers of the House, including both of you, have banded together to express concern over reducing the important oversight. What prompted you to take that immediate and unprecedented action?
It was the brainchild of my colleague, and for which I'm extremely grateful. But we quickly realized that it was a no-brainer as far as officers of Parliament were concerned. It's just we've all had our experiences, certainly the Auditor General and myself, with Hydro One, and we realized that this is not the kind of thing that is in the public interest to get rid of our 2 offices in the state that Hydro One is in right now.
I'm just not sure in terms of time whether I'll be able to read my intro on this.
Under the order of the House, every witness, whether it's a group, is only allowed 5 minutes of presentation.
Okay, so
I can ask you a question on that.
Yeah. Okay.
If you'd like to.
You know what? With respect to the joint statement, I think the one thing to keep in mind is that Hydro will still be substantially owned by the public, and the taxpayers, ratepayers. And so I think, the fact that there's an evolution in this process, it doesn't make sense to immediately remove oversight by the independent officers. There's a lot of ongoing work. We, in fact, are working on the power system planning audit. We have an audit of the transmission system of Hydro One going on, and we'll be doing a follow-up of smart meters. Now, with the change, the follow-up on all those audits will never be conducted. There isn't anybody under the OSC or under the OEB that will be able to do that similar type of work. So at the end of the day, Hydro One will be consolidated within the public accounts of the province of Ontario, and for that reason, it makes sense to have oversight. And the other side is, when there are dramatic changes made to mandates of legislative officers, I personally think it's really important to have a very good discussion around the logic of excluding officers or changing their mandates, just as a protocol, I think. So,
Okay, I'm going to turn to the government side for the question. Mr. Delaney?
It's
Ms.
like
Albanese.
To start,
Okay.
If I may, Madam Chair. And I want to thank you both for being here today, for taking the time to speak to the committee. And as you are aware, to maintain the public trust throughout the initial public offering, so this is a question that I'm sort of asking both of you. You know that the former Auditor General of Canada, Denis Desautels, has agreed to serve as a special advisor to the Minister of Energy to provide advice about the processes that are related to the engagement of financial advisors and of other service providers for the IPO. And Hydro One, as you pointed out, will be required to establish a dedicated ombudsman, similar to those that are found at other public companies. And the former Auditor General of Canada will provide advice on how to establish the office of this dedicated ombudsman, and to ensure that the transparency, objectivity, accountability are followed. In addition, the Ontario Energy Board would continue to protect the public interest, and the powers of the OEB would be enhanced, including the creation of consumer advocacy roles. So that, I'm just talking about all the different provisions that are there. And Ontario's proposal to go public with the shares of Hydro One is also preceded by a number of other examples of similar decisions that were taken at different levels of government. For example, Petro-Canada that ceased to be a Crown corporation, so the Auditor General Act of Canada no longer applies to Petro-Canada. Another example is CN Rail. The Auditor General's Act of Canada no longer applies to the CN Rail because it is no longer a Crown corporation. So in regards to the complaints, the approach that we have taken to broaden the ownership, it's so that we have a company, a public company that would operate hopefully efficiently and better serve the interest of the ratepayers and the customers of Hydro One. So my question to you is, would you agree that a publicly traded company doesn't have the oversight of the Ombudsman, of the Auditor General, but instead has a different set, different mechanisms of oversight for disclosure obligations?
I would say in the case of Hydro One, though, this is a very different animal in terms of the way the governance will be set up and the way the tranches of the sales of the shares will be handled. So in essence, from an accounting perspective and from the public accounts perspective, Hydro One will be rolled into the consolidated statements of the public accounts.
I'm very sorry, Ms. Lasik. That's time's up. I'm going to go to the next witness before us. Thank you.